April Fool's Day, 1696. The island of Providence is in trouble. England and France are currently at war, and the colony is under constant threat of attack. The navy has abandoned them. Men are fleeing the island, deserting their posts on Fort Nassau, the island's only defense. Governor Nicholas Trott paces around his office, not knowing what to do. A messenger knocks on his door. A new ship has arrived, and in it are some strange men. Trott runs down to the shore. The men are dressed in rags, interspersed with exotic items, the likes of calico and silk. They are so tanned that it is only up close that it becomes apparent that they're white men, most of them English or Irish. All of them are armed to the teeth. Trott swallows. They carry a letter from their captain. His name's Henry Bridgman, and he comes to Trott with a brief and simple proposition. His ship, the Fancy, has only 2 days' worth of supplies. If Trott will give the arrivals their liberty to do as they please, the governor will be paid 20 pieces of 8 and 2 pieces of gold per every man, in addition to the ship itself and everything aboard. Trott is taken to the ship. It is no meager sloop, so common for trade and salt raking around these isles. It is a hulking fifth rate, carrying 46 guns and bristling with cargo, oriental treasures the likes of silk, gold dust, and ivory. There is also gunpowder, bullets, and muskets. Warlike stores needed for the defense of Providence. Trott takes out a handkerchief and wipes his brow. The heat is unbearable. 2 years have passed. Trott is taken in by the royal authorities for interrogation. It turns out that the captain wasn't named Henry Bridgman. His real name was Henry Avery. The reason he had landed on Nassau was because he had just committed a brutal heist in the Indian Ocean, then the greatest act of piracy up until that point, and was now the target of the world's first international manhunt. Trott's post as governor was forfeit. He had assisted the escape of the most wanted man in the world. And now he was gone. Just like the ending, the origins of this story lie shrouded in mystery. There have been debates regarding his name. Some call him Avery, others Avery. One of his crewmen described the captain in 1696 as being about 40 years old and hailing from Plymouth. Records show that in 1659 in Newton Ferris, a boy named Henry was born to John and Anne Avery. According to Adrian Van Broeck, who was supposedly aboard Avery's ship, he was born John Avery in 1653. However, the name we know may not be real. He was known to use aliases: John Avery, Henry Ivory, Benjamin Bridgman. Perhaps this was his actual name. One of his common nicknames was Long Ben. There are no portraits or eyewitness illustrations depicting the captain's likeness. For the thumbnail and throughout the video, I used the portrait of Sir Thomas Hobson, an English admiral, in order to fit the style of the channel and have something appealing to look at. There are some posthumous engravings made of him. The earliest one was made for the 1725 edition of A General History of the Pirates. It has a horrible knockoff produced a few years later. The second engraving is from the 1734 edition. There are some physical descriptions of what Avery looked like. He was described by one of his crewmen as wearing a light-colored wig, that he had a swarthy complexion, grey eyes, and a flattish nose. Van Broeck described the captain as middle-sized, inclinable to be fat, and of a jolly complexion. His temper was of a piece with his person, daring and good-tempered, but insolent and uneasy at times, and always unforgiving to the last degree, if at any time imposed upon. Judging by the nickname of Long Ben, he was very likely above average height. Being from Plymouth in the West Country, he would have spoken with a cliché pirate accent, interspersed by the occasional "Arr." Avery was literate, something quite necessary as a maritime officer. A surprising amount of documents believed to have been drafted by him have been preserved, including a ballad and a declaration of his intentions. The man knew how to manipulate the media. He wrote several letters to his wife during his time at sea. For rallying men into mutiny, Avery must have been charismatic, and he appears to have been an excellent leader. He was able to quietly make calm decisions, but with a strong resolution, and knew precisely how much independence to give his men. He had foresight, but also the ability to improvise. Together with his ability to sway public opinion, control his crew, become immensely rich, retire in obscurity, and preserve his name in legend, Avery was either extremely lucky, or more likely, a man of astounding intellect. It is not known when, why, or where Avery first went to sea. According to Van Broeck, Avery entered the Royal Navy at 14 years of age, and partook in action against the Barbary corsairs. Perhaps it helped him develop a hatred towards Islam. When the war had ended, he joined an expedition to the Americas, and became a buccaneer. Van Broeck's account may largely be fictional, an attempt to capitalize on the contemporary popularity of Avery. He claims that the reason Avery later became a pirate was because his wife cheated on him, and he lost faith in humanity. The West Country has fallen, etc. But he may have had experience as a buccaneer, as Van Broeck stated. During the trial of some of his men, the pirate said how Avery was a true cock of the game, and an old sportsman. Van Broeck states that Avery fought in the Anglo-Dutch War, and then sailed as a merchant to Campeche, buying logwood from the pirate lumberjacks, Bayman called. One of the earliest written appearances of Avery was in 1689, when he signed aboard the HMS Rupert as a midshipman in Portsmouth. Midshipmen were minor officers, eventually expected to learn the ropes and become major officers. They were either young, aristocratic boys or older, skilled seamen, like Avery. These officers who had climbed the ranks were known as tarpaulins. War had now broken out with France, and after a year of service, Avery had risen to the rank of master's mate, indicating that he was a promising navigator. By the summer of 1690, the campaign slowed down, and Avery was discharged. The same year, he got married. Record suggests that his wife's maiden name was Dorothy Arthur, but it isn't certain. As Mrs. Avery, it is known that she made her living by selling wigs on Ratcliffe Highway, a popular haunt for sailors in London. Perhaps she made a wig which the captain reputedly wore. Avery did not spend much time on land. Between 1690 and 1693, it appears that he worked as master aboard a slave ship. His captain wrote how he never found a Negro so shy and so scarce, which he attributes to kidnapping tricks having been played on them by Long Ben, alias Avery, and others of his kidney, who had seized upon them and carried them off without payment. It seems the trade was illicit, as no records exist of Avery being employed by the Royal African Company, who possessed a monopoly on the slave trade. Henry Bruce wrote how Avery worked under the protection of the governor of the Bahamas, Cadwallader Jones. Cadwallader is actually one of my favorite historical figures from this time. He was a complete scumbag who worked with pirates and criminals to suppress the local populace and make his own fortune. It certainly seems as though Avery had connections to the Bahamas, as it would later become a vital part of his final escape plan. Anyway, by 1693, Avery was back in London. He had heard the news of a private venture seeking able-bodied seamen, called the Spanish Expedition. The goal was to protect Spanish trade interests in the Americas, in addition to recovering gold from Spanish shipwrecks. England's economy wasn't doing too well, and this expedition was believed to be a much-needed cash injection. The King of Spain, Carlos, welcomed the idea, and the expedition flagship was named in his honor, Charles II. The expedition had no trouble attracting recruits, as they would be paid better wages than in the Royal Navy. Among the recruits was the main character of the Pirate Age, William Dampier, a veteran buccaneer, explorer, and natural scientist. And of course, the chief mate aboard the Charles II was Henry Avery. The fleet departed on the 8th of September, 1693, and it did not start on good footing. It took them 5 months just to reach Coruña in Spain, often called the Groin or Coruna by English seamen. Here they were supposed to wait for official passes and instructions from the Spanish crown. They waited, and then they sailed. No, just kidding, they waited some more. When idle, sailors tend to become troublesome, especially when not paid their wages. The fleet commanders were neither allowed to pay them, nor could they if they wanted to, because they didn't have the money. The admiral wrote home to London begging for payment, where several of the sailors' wives had banded together to protest. In order to appease the men, the Admiral finally allowed the crew to go ashore and let off some steam in the taverns and brothels. Hindsight is a bitch. Maybe it was a good idea, but it did not prevent the spreading of rumors and sedition. The sailors began to speculate that their ships were to be sold, and that they were to be press-ganged into the Spanish Navy. Since the Admiral was an Irish Catholic, some had doubts as to his loyalties. Perhaps the King of Spain, or even the treacherous Jacobites. The crew reached a breaking point when William May approached the Admiral, willing to forgo his wage if he was allowed to cut his contract and return home. The Admiral responded curtly by saying that if May did not return to his post, he'd be thrown in prison. Then, there was silence. Groups of men could be seen huddled across the ships, growing strangely silent when officers approached. There were no songs when they marched through the taverns, and they sat around lonesome candles in the darkest of corners, whispering. On the 7th of May, 1694, the captain of the Charles lay sick in his cabin. The Admiral was sleeping ashore. Avery spent the day going between the ships. In the afternoon, he called aboard a cooper as there were some casks that needed attention. The cooper was a vital artisan aboard any ship, especially for long voyages, as he tended to barrels in which most of the provisions were stored. In the evening, Avery had dinner with the captain and officer corps in the cabin. When it was done, Avery and some others went to have a drink. May proposed a toast to the captain and prosperity to their voyage. Before 9 p.m., most of the men had retired to their cabins. In the darkness, a rowboat went between the ships. When it reached the ship James, someone called out to the watchman, "Is your drunken boatswain aboard?" Mr. Druitt, mate of the James, was naturally confused and asked what they meant. There was no drunken boatswain aboard. The men in the boat were equally confused. They told him that was the password. He asked, "The password for what?" "The password for the mutiny, of course." Druitt turned on his heels and ran to the cabin. The men in the boat quickly rowed away. The captain of the James ordered them pursued. One group of men were especially eager to volunteer and got into a boat. Druitt soon realized that they were also mutineers. He ordered them to row back, but his words were ignored. He fired a shot and made a hole in the boat, but soon enough it was gone in the darkness. Meanwhile, Avery had seized control of the Charles II. The loyalist officers had been arrested and put under guard. The carpenter was cutting the anchor cable with an axe. One of the men tried to stop him, but the carpenter kicked him away, threatening to hack his leg off. Just as the cable had been cut and the Charles started gliding away, the mutineers from the James arrived and were brought aboard. The captain of the James called out to the Charles, saying that some of his men had run away with a boat. Avery responded, "I know that well enough." Realizing now that the mutiny was underway, the James fired 2 shots on the Charles, but it was too late. As the Charles glid out from the harbor, the Spanish fort opened fire, but it was minimal and ineffective, the garrison most likely confused as to what had happened. Soon enough, the Charles had escaped into the night. William Dampier's involvement in the affair is debated upon. He later appeared sympathetic to their cause and admitted having had friends among them. Dampier's experience would have been known to Avery, and it's very likely that they knew each other, maybe even as friends. Perhaps it was Dampier, who had traveled across the world, including India and East Asia, that gave Avery the idea of his eventual destination. Either way, Dampier would stay in the Groin, return to London, and never be charged for partaking in the mutiny. Well out at sea, Avery had the captain and everyone uninitiated brought up to the main deck. Here he declared, "I am a man of fortune, and must seek my fortune." The captain responded, "I am sorry this happens at this time." To some surprise, Avery then said, "If you will go in the ship, you shall still command her." The captain declined. He would not go against the orders of his employers. So, he and his loyalists were put in a boat and set adrift. One of the men begged to go below deck and retrieve his chest, but the mutineers forbid it. Avery gave him some clothes to put on. He also gave him his commission as chief mate, signaling his resignation from the Spanish expedition. It doesn't appear as though anyone was forced to stay against their will, though some would, naturally, later claim that they were. May's final wish was that the loyalists would give regards to his wife in London, Jane May. Interestingly, at the same time, Jane led a petition to the Queen herself, begging her to get the men's wages. She argued that the sailors had been betrayed, that the mutiny was justified, and that they were planning on coming home to England. The employers responded by saying that it was the Spanish fault, and that the mutineers had intentions to become pirates, thus forfeiting their wages. There wasn't any clear evidence of their piratical intentions, so far. However, shortly after news of the mutiny reached England, a broadside ballad appeared mysteriously in the taverns, allegedly written by Avery himself. The first 2 verses went as follows. "Come all you brave boys whose courage is bold, will you venture with me? I'll glut you with gold. Make haste on the Corona, a ship you will find, that's called a Fancy, will pleasure your mind. Captain Avery's in her, and calls her his own. He will box her about, boys, before he has done. French, Spaniard, and Portuguese, the heathen likewise. He has made a war with them, until that he dies." There has been a lot of speculation regarding the flag of Henry Avery. He is often depicted flying a black or red flag with a skull facing sideways, wearing a bandana and a round earring. Historians agree unanimously that this is a posthumous invention. It appears first in a German book from 1959 called Badbuch des Satans, and its very appearance betrays its authenticity. Bandanas and earrings were not associated with pirates until the late 19th century, and the paintings made by Howard Pyle. During the 17th and 18th centuries, earrings were not popular with English sailors. They were with the Dutch, though they typically wore a triangular or teardrop-shaped sort. In the general history of the pirates, Avery is seen flying a black flag with a pair of crossed bones. Though this picture was made closer to Avery's career in the 1720s, the style of flag did not become common among pirates until around 1750, and it doesn't seem to have been invented until around the year 1700. So again, posthumous. Some have used Avery's ballad as a source for the flags he might have used. In verse 9, he writes, "I honor St. George, and his colors I wear." It was common for all pirates to simply fly their national flags. The ballad also mentions, in verse 11, "Yet call but for quarters before you do see a bloody flag out, which is our decree." It was common for all vessels of the time to fly red flags to indicate a will to neither show nor take quarter. A common battle flag, essentially. But it's in verses 10 and 11 that things really get interesting. "But he that refuses shall suddenly spy strange colours aboard of my fancy to fly. For chevrils of gold in a bloody field, environed with green, now this is my shield." This flag can be traced as the family shield of the Averys of Derby. Perhaps Avery was part of this family, or simply tried to appear as a gentleman in order to claim legitimacy, something which a few pirates did. Or if he didn't write the ballad, the author tried to connect him to them. There are no other sources corroborating his usage of this flag, but it's not impossible. The ballad appears to have gotten an intimate and very early knowledge of the pirates' intentions, such as renaming Charles II to the Fancy. Who's to say that the flag isn't true either, or that Avery didn't write the ballad? It also appears similar to banners used by buccaneers. Richard Sawkins used a flag striped yellow and red. Bartholomew Sharp's was red, with white and green ribbons. With the Charles II renamed the Fancy, she sailed next to the Cape Verde Islands, a Portuguese colony often frequented by anyone bound for Africa or the Cape of Good Hope. Avery likely knew it since his slavering days. Here they met a trio of English merchants. The merchants first thought the Fancy to be a poorly armed French privateer and prepared to make a resistance. When it became clear that the Fancy was a fifth-rate Englishman carrying a battery of 46 guns, they soon reconsidered. Avery asked them to come aboard, and they did so nicely. The merchant crews were held captive for 24 hours, while the pirates looted their ships for provisions. In return, the merchants were given bills of payment, most likely forged, and drawing from a fictitious bank. It was a poor farce at a legitimate trade. When they were done, the captives were released. 9 of them stayed, 2 later claiming to have been forced. But before we continue, do you like buying stuff without paying for it? Well, yes. Just like me, you're probably a pirate. Sorry, privateer. Thanks to today's sponsor, Mr. Henry Bridgman, you can acquire your very own bills of sale and procure any goods that you like. Being drawn up at a totally real bank of Aldgate Pump, these bills are backed by 100% real unclipped money and signed by the Honourable Timothy Tugmudden and Simon Whifflingpin. By buying these bills from Mr. Bridgman, you can then use the bills to buy goods from an initially lesser investment. It's a killer deal. Literally, you might have to back up the use of your bills with a pistol. Don't ask, just do it. By using my promo code is the Drunken Bosun Award, you'll get a whopping 10% discount, rounding off at a base cost of only £9. Thank you to Mr. Bridgman. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell. Next they sailed to the coast of Guinea, where Avery used one of his slavering tricks to lure several Africans aboard. They were robbed of their gold dust and taken as slaves. Heading on to the island of Principe, they stopped a pair of Danish merchants and asked them to hand over all of their money. The Danes refused. They put up a fierce resistance, but after about an hour, the fancy had pounded both of the ships into submission. 1 pirate was killed and 5 Danes. They were forced to give up their goods, and Avery justified the attack by saying that England and Denmark were at war, which they weren't. 7 of the slaves were exchanged for supplies, and 14 of the Danish volunteered to join the pirates. One of the ships was burned, and the other taken as a prize. At the island of Fernando Po, now called Bioko, the pirates careened their ships and made some alterations to the fancy. The raised sections and upper decks were cut away, making the ship more flush and speedier. The East India Company would later remark on how fast she was. Together with her considerable firepower, the Fancy was one of the most well-armed and dangerous pirate ships of all time. The pirates went on and took a ship at Cape Lopez. A fight broke out among the crew of the consort ship. Avery had them recalled aboard the Fancy, and the consort sunk. They sailed south, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and headed straight to Madagascar. If you watched my previous video on the pirate round, you'll know that Madagascar had been a popular pirate base since around 1690. However, Avery did not visit St. Mary's Island, and the popular pirate base run by Adam Baldridge. It is unclear where he anchored exactly, perhaps at St. Augustine's Bay, another popular haunt for his kind. They cleaned the ship, bought provisions from the locals with guns and ammunition, and sailed next to the Comoro Islands. Here they engaged an Arabic vessel. It was later run aground, seemingly to avenge their 1 pirate casualty. By now, William May had gotten sick. They landed on the island of Johanna to collect water and let him recover. But when 3 East Indiamen were spotted bearing down on them, May was left behind, as the Fancy escaped. The Indiamen were unable to outrun the Fancy, and were amazed by her speed. Knowing Johanna to be a frequent stopping point for European ships, Avery left behind an interesting letter addressed to all Englishmen. The original document has been preserved to this day. It reads as follows: "To all English commanders, let this satisfy that I was riding here at this instant in the ship Fancy man of war, formerly the Charles of the Spanish expedition, who departed from Corunna the 7th of May 1694, being, and am now, in a ship of 46 guns, 150 men, and bound to seek our fortunes. I have never yet wronged any English or Dutch, nor ever intended whilst I am commander. Wherefore, as I commonly speak with all ships, I desire whoever comes to the perusal of this, to take this signal, that if you, or any whom you may inform, are desirous to know what we are at a distance, then make up your ensign up in a ball or bundle, and hoist them at the mizzen peak, the mizzen being furled. I shall answer with the same and never molest you, for my men are hungry, stout, and resolute, and should they exceed my desire, I cannot help myself. As yet an Englishman's friend, Henry Avery." The intentions of the letter have long been debated. Avery has been called out for claiming he never attacked any Englishmen. Perhaps he viewed his robbery of the English ships at Cape Verde as a forced but legitimate trade, since he did give them a bill of sale and supplies in return. Either way, it was a clever appeal to patriotism to gather support and potential allies or recruits. Many pirates, and people who supported them, believed that piracy against religious enemies was completely legitimate. Many wanted revenge against Islam for the depredations committed by the Barbary corsairs, whom Avery allegedly fought against. Maybe there was a sense of patriotism to his ideals, or maybe it was cynical exploitation. Either way, together with his ballad, the groundwork was already laid for him to become a folk hero of England. Moving along the coast of Somalia, they encountered resistance when the people of Maid refused to do business with them. The pirates burned their town and blew up a mosque, again highlighting their hatred for the Mohammedan religion. The Fancy continued to the gateway of the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb, known to pirates as the Babs. Wealthy pilgrim ships returning to India from Hajj in Mecca would have to pass through this narrow passage, making them susceptible to pirate attacks. Avery was not alone in his ambitions. Somewhere in the Gulf of Aden, he met two small English ships, the Dolphin and the Portsmouth Adventure, commanded by Captains Richard Want and Joseph Farrell. The captains all decided to team up. Their next goal was the volcanic island of Perim, nicknamed Bob's Key, where more pirates lay waiting for them. On their way there, they were separated by a storm. When the Fancy arrived at Perim, the Adventure had beat them to it, but the Dolphin was gone and figured lost. However, as the crew set to mending their ship, the lost child revealed herself. She was late because they had rescued a French pirate crew from starving and recruited them into their company. 3 days later arrived 3 more ships, the 10-gun Susanna, the 6-gun Pearl, and the 8-gun Amity, a legendary Bermuda sloop, captained by Thomas Tew. 3 years prior, he had made a similar and very profitable expedition into the Red Sea, and his experience was no doubt valuable to Avery's intentions. The fleet now consisted of 6 ships, 400 men, and 82 guns. They were nigh invincible. Common articles were drawn up, and Avery elected as admiral. The next few weeks were spent idling. Historian E.T. Fox suggested that aside from drinking, gambling, and sharing stories, they may have played sports on the open deck. Football, skittles, and maybe even cricket. Much of the time would have been spent languishing under the cruel Arabian sun. When 6 weeks had passed, the crew began to panic. A pinnace was sent out. After capturing 2 trading boats, it returned with a pair of prisoners, telling them that the pilgrim fleet was on its way. The men rejoiced, and perhaps drank themselves to sleep. A Saturday night in August, something seemed to be stirring in the darkness ahead of the fleet. Whatever it was massive. None of the pirates seemed to notice. And then, it was gone. A few days later, the pirates learned that the pilgrim fleet had slipped right past them. The choice was now either to stay, keep waiting for a smaller merchant ship to show up, or they would pursue and try to catch them before they arrived back in India. If they missed the fleet, it would be gone out of their hands forever. The fleet weighed anchor. A convoy can only sail as fast as their slowest ship. Soon the Dolphin proved a liability. She was abandoned, burned, and her crew taken aboard the Fancy. The Pearl wasn't doing much better, but with the Fancy overcrowded, she was towed behind the flagship. Even when weighed down, the Fancy was far ahead of the Susanna and even the Amity, attesting to her incredible speed. Only the Adventure was able to keep up. Avery would have to engage the Pilgrims with only half of his fleet. 4 days after departing the Babs, the Fancy spotted the Fateh Mohammed, a 300-ton merchant ship owned by Abdul Ghaffur. When the pirates closed in, they signaled for the Mohammed to surrender. They responded with a broadside. However, the Mohammed carried only 6 guns total, whereas the Fancy was almost twice her size and carried close to 10 times her armament. The Fancy's broadside must have been terrifying. Ships at the time did not fire all of their guns at once, it would have capsized them. Instead, 1 gun was fired at a time, what was called a rolling broadside. Arguably, this was more terrifying. You'd hear a shot, the whistle of a bullet, before the impact in the sea or your ship. Perhaps a comrade next to you is hit. Then a second shot, and a third, and you keep wondering when it will stop. 1 broadside from the Fancy held 23 guns. After 1.5 hours, the Fancy had boarded the Fateh Mohammed and forced her into surrender. The loot amounted to £60,000, around $60 million today. A sizable fortune, but not enough. Taking the Fateh with them as a prize, the squadron continued. On the 5th of September, 1695, they spotted a vessel even larger than the Fancy, the Ganges Sawai, known to the English as the Gunsway. Of 700 tons burthen or more, she carried around 60 guns and a crew of 200, in addition to 400 musket-armed soldiers and 600 passengers. The Indian soldiers were said to be expert swordsmen. Her captain was Ibrahim Khan, a confidant of Emperor Aurangzeb himself, leader of the Mughal Empire. She would prove a formidable scrap. As the pirates closed in, the Gunsway fired 2 of her stern guns. The Fancy did not respond. Soon, the 2 ships came alongside. The Gunsway fired first. Yet, being a taller ship than the Pirate, they likewise aimed their guns too highly, and most of the broadside missed. The Pirates did not. A lucky shot felled the Gunsway's mainmast. Seeing an opportunity, Avery seized it and ordered the enemy boarded. It would not be easy. The numerically superior Indian soldiers harried them with musketry and threw down grenades and fireworks as they closed in. It was well known that Indians were renowned swordsmen. But as fortune would have it, one of the cannons aboard the Gunsway exploded, killing 3 or 4 men, wounding more and causing a panic. The pirates rejoiced. They threw over grappling hooks and began the long climb up the sides of the taller ship. Ibrahim Khan had fled below deck, where he kept a harem of Arabic concubines. Putting turbans on their heads and swords in their hands, he told them to fight off the pirates. When they reached the upper deck, it was now covered in bodies. Men lying dying, screaming. Blood ran out of the scuppers and leaked down the sides. After 3.5 hours, the pirates had won. But at what cost? The aftermath of the conquest has become infamous. An Indian source, Kafi Khan, recounted the following. The enemy soon became perfect masters of the ship. They transferred the treasure and many prisoners to their own ship. When they had laden their ship, they brought the royal ship to shore near one of their settlements and busied themselves for a week searching for plunder, stripping the men and dishonoring the women, both old and young. They then left the ship, carrying off the men. Several honorable women, when they found an opportunity, threw themselves into the sea to preserve their chastity, and some others killed themselves with daggers. The horrors aboard the Gunsway were likewise recounted by English sources. In a pamphlet called The Last Dying Words and Confession of John Spark of the Fancy, one of Avery's arrested crewmen, it is said, "This villain expressed his contrition for the horrid barbarities he had committed, though only on the bodies of heathens. The inhuman treatment and merciless tortures inflicted on the poor Indians and their women still afflicted his soul." The East India Company, having heard of this in Bombay, wrote the following. It is certain that the pirates did do very barbarously by the people of the Gunsway and Abdul Ghaffur's ship, to make them confess where their money was. And there happened to be a great Umbra's wife, related to King Aurangzeb, returning from her pilgrimage to Mecca in her old age. She they abused very much, and forced several other women, which caused one person of quality, his wife and nurse, to kill themselves, to prevent a husband seeing them ravished. However, it does not appear as though the hero, or perhaps anti-hero of our story, Henry Avery, engaged in any of these acts himself. His 13-year-old cabin boy later reported that all of the Fancy's men, except Avery, boarded by turns. Perhaps he meant that Avery never took his turn to go aboard the Gunsway, thus refraining from the vehemence, or that he could go aboard whenever he pleased. To say that the attack caused some controversy would be an understatement. The Gunsway was considered a holy possession of the Emperor, and the violation of the women aboard was regarded as a religious insult. An angry mob besieged the East India headquarters, as the Indians were unable to discern English pirates from regular English. To them, they were all the same hatmen, and the rival companies from other nations were quite happy to encourage this confusion. They were not laughing so much when hatred for the English blossomed over to include all Europeans, all hatmen. And indeed, many French, Danes, and possibly a few Dutchmen had partaken in the attack and other piratical ventures. The Red Seamen were quite diverse. The Avery affair was swiftly becoming of international interest. It is not known for certain how much money Avery got away with. Estimates range from 200 to 400 million US dollars in today's money, but it's largely guesswork when working with 300 years of inflation. It must also be mentioned that Avery himself did not go home with the entire haul. It could not even be claimed that he took the lion's share. He was only paid twice of what the regular crewmen got. And the exact value of every share is uncertain and varies on reports. Some crewmen claim to have received 600 or 700 pounds, not even keeping track themselves, whereas some said the share was between 700 and 800 per man. During one of the trials, a pirate said that some had 1,000, some 500, others 3,000. All of this is quite hard to interpret. Maybe some of the men received their payment in goods, which had to be sold. Others got hard cash. Maybe some received a base share and a bonus based on their performance, or compensation for injuries. But it seems as if Avery received a sum between £3,000 and £6,000. And though it's far from what they all took, it's still an incredible amount of money. Governor Nicholas Trott received a yearly salary of a mere £300. A gentleman in England received between £1,000 to £5,000 a year, a sailor £15, and as a first mate, Avery would have earned 44. And the amounts earned by Avery's crew are utterly insane when compared to Caribbean pirates, who were lucky to get away with £10 or £20 in a single cruise. Still better than working hard as a regular seaman, but there was a strong incentive to make the pirate round. Neither is it certain if Avery's heist was the greatest in history. It may have been supplanted by the taking of the Nossa Senhora do Cabo in 1721 by Richard Taylor and Olivier Levasseur, or the lesser-known robbery of the Great Mohammed in 1698 by Robert Culliford and Dirk Shivers. In the end, it doesn't really matter. Avery got stinking rich and pissed off a lot of people in the process. Had it not been for the diplomatic skills of some EIC officials, Ormsted may have had the company thrown out of India, ending the British Empire before it had even truly begun. The pirate fleet reconvened somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Since only the Pearl and Fancy had partaken in the fight, only their crews were paid any shares. The crew of the Portsmouth Adventure got some money from their fight with the Fateh Mohammed, and those of the Susanna managed to capture a smaller merchant in the Indian Ocean. There was no word of the Amity. Somewhere during the pursuit, Thomas too had been killed by a cannonball. The crew of the Pearl decided to pull a little trick on the crew of the Fancy. Most of their hull was silver, whereas the Fancy had mostly gold, considered to be the optimal, universal currency. So they suggested swapping all of their gold for an equivalent amount of silver. Avery agreed. It was only after the swap that he discovered that the Pearl's crew had clipped the coins, cut or shaved off the edges, reducing their value. Neither Avery nor his men found it especially funny. At gunpoint they took all the treasure from the Pearl, leaving them with only enough money to buy provisions. She returned to the Indian Ocean to find new prey, whilst the Portsmouth was wrecked on the Comoro Islands. The Fancy first made landfall at Rajpur, seeking water and supplies. They ended up in a skirmish with the locals. From thence they sailed to Ile Bourbon, where the plunder was divided and most of the French and Danish left the company. They used their money to buy land, living out their lives in peace and retirement. One of them, Dennis Turpin, even became a member of the island's council. The Fancy continued southward, rounding the Cape of Good Hope and landing at the Portuguese island of São Tomé, where they purchased supplies for the long journey ahead. Despite now being some of the richest men in the world, the pirates refused to pay with actual money, giving instead some of those fake bills that they had paid with 2 years prior. It had been drawn at the Bank of Aldgate Pump, and signed by Timothy Tugmudden and Simon Whifflingpin. No Englishman would have fallen for those signees, considering that they were well-known comical names of the time, and they sound like euphemisms of masturbation and oral sex. People in this period were not prude, by the way, especially not pirates. But likely unfamiliar to the Portuguese, who probably couldn't see the difference between Tugmudden and, I don't know, Barnaby, Fitzgerald, whatever names the English use. Before the Atlantic crossing, Avery and his men made a stop at Ascension Island, located midway between Africa and South America. This island was largely barren and uninhabited, so it might seem strange why the pirates would make landfall. The reason was turtle. Turtles would come ashore between January and April to lay their eggs, making them a prime catch for sailors. They were one of the most popular sources of protein, largely owing to their excellent taste. 17 men were left behind on Ascension. Perhaps they liked the taste of turtle a bit too much. Perhaps they feared going into the Americas. Their fate is uncertain. As mentioned in the first part of the video, Avery appears to have had contacts in the Bahamas, especially on the island of New Providence. They arrived in April of 1696, anchoring off Eleuthera Island. Governor Jones had since been replaced by Nicholas Trott, who was still very eager to accept a personal bribe from the pirates, in addition to the Fancy herself, and all the trade goods and weaponry found aboard. When the deal had been struck, the party convened at the governor's house, where he promised them safety. One of the pirates broke a glass and had to pay for it. Then, the pirates scattered. Some of them got married and settled down among the populace. Some of them bought property, like James Griffin. He was later arrested but managed to escape with the help of the jailer, who had been aboard the Pearl during the taking of the Gunsway. The surgeon would be twice put on trial, once on Providence and once in London, but was acquitted both times. One of his shipmates traveled to Jamaica, where he was eaten by a shark. The stories of the other crewmen are largely similar. Retirements, arrests, escapes, releases. Most of them faced some trouble but eventually slipped into anonymity. But what about Avery himself? In June of 1696, he and several of his men boarded a ship bound for Ireland. They arrived less than a month later, sometime in June at Dunfanaghy in Northern Ireland. They bribed a customs official, who gave many of them passes to go to Dublin. Whether Avery went to Dublin, stayed in Dunfanaghy or went somewhere else is uncertain. It is at this anticlimactic point that Avery disappears from historical records, but not from popular perception. In 1724, Captain Charles Johnson published A General History of the Pirates, in which he retold the story of Henry Avery. In his account, the captain's life ended after he was cheated of his treasure by Bristol merchants. He ended his days in poverty. There is no evidence for this story. If he was known to have lived as a pauper, someone would have caught him and claimed the bounty. Most likely, the ending was another attempt by Johnson to moralize, both on the follies of piracy and the deceptions of merchants. This story had been based in turn on a book from 1720 written by Daniel Defoe, titled The King of Pirates, being an account of the famous enterprises of Captain Avery, the mock king of Madagascar, wherein all the sham accounts formerly published of him are detected. Yes, 18th century book titles usually were this long, often longer. Johnson's book has shaped our conception of pirates. Next to none are the historical books, which do not at least quote it for trivia. Most use it as a basis for the research. You'll find it quoted in Treasure Island and Pirates of the Caribbean. But the book did not come out of nowhere. Johnson based it on a long literary tradition, essentially a contemporary genre of true crime, centered around pirates and social bandits. The very pen name of Captain Charles Johnson was plagiarized from the playwright Charles Johnson, who in 1712 wrote a very successful play called The Successful Pirate. In this play, Avery goes by the name of Arviragus. He has made himself king of Madagascar and tries to marry an Indian princess named Saida. This story was in turn based on the account written by Adrian Van Broeck. Broeck's account is really one of the strangest things I've read from the period. It's sort of a middle ground between Exquemelin's History of the Buccaneers and Captain Charles Johnson's general history. Akin to Exquemelin, Van Broeck claims to have been aboard Avery's ship, and it does contain a lot of provable facts like Avery's place of birth and details which seem likely, like his sailing background and physical appearance. In other places it's ridiculously cheesy. It is said that Avery became a pirate because his wife cheated on him. Basically 17th century incel rage. When he then captures the Ganji Sawai, the crew do not erupt into an orgy of slaughter and rape, but draw lots as to who shall marry which of the nubile handmaidens. Of course, they ask for consent. Their mistress, a young Indian princess, falls in love with Avery at first sight, and they get married there and then on the spot. He then continues to Madagascar, where Avery builds a fleet, constructs a fort, allies the natives and founds himself a kingdom, ruling together with his queen, the Indian princess. In his account, Van Broeck calls this polity the Republic of Pirates. The account is strangely sexual. It claims that one of Avery's first projects was to go out and acquire, quote, a cargo of ladies in order to perpetuate the government by way of generation. Van Broeck's account was published as a chapbook, a form of inexpensive street literature, which would have been available to the masses. The chapbook was in turn based on an article from 1708, some memoirs concerning that famous pirate Captain Avery, published in the short-lived periodical Monthly Miscellany. Interestingly, both the article and the chapbook omit the mutiny at Corunna, and instead portrays Avery as a man who pulled himself up by the bootstraps. In Memoirs, Avery is portrayed as a man cheated of his inheritance by English society. It is also the first known text to describe him forming a state on Madagascar. Though it's never called a republic as in the chapbook, Avery is elected and compared to the Dukes of Venice or the Doge of Genoa, Venice and Genoa being oligarchic republics in this period. He also establishes a legal code and distributes plunder freely. Overall, his state is viewed as utopian and appears to be social critique, or simply an attempt to make money by selling an appealing story of revenge against society, featuring a popular character. It has next to nothing to do with actual historical events. Van Broeck's chapbook seems to have been more successful, and the periodical in which Memoirs was published lasted only 3 years before presumably flopping. The chapbook did likewise plagiarize a lot of the ideas and excerpts from Memoirs, the latter of which was published anonymously, so maybe they were written by the same author. In turn, Memoirs was based on over a decade's worth of tavern yarns, songs, and published ballads. What makes Henry Avery so fascinating to me is how self-conscious he was about his own identity. This is apparent by the ballad he probably wrote himself at the start of his career. When this ballad arrived in London, it was even used by the employers of the Spanish expedition as a proof of his mutiny and intentions. The ballad was then rewritten and republished to be more antagonistic, and after passing through millions of mouths, it was reprinted and rewritten again, and again. It persisted into the 20th century. What's really strange about the Avery legend is how it affected people's life decisions and even national policy. Between 1696 and 1703, several Royal Navy squadrons were sent to uproot the pirates of Madagascar. All of the expeditions ended anticlimactically, because Madagascar was not the pirate kingdom they had heard of. The real Avery had barely even visited it. Captain Woodes Rogers, the man who would put an end to Caribbean piracy, still believed in this legend in 1713. He had the ambitions of pardoning the pirates and building there an English colony. But when he arrived on the island himself, he found the only pirates there to be a bunch of marooners who had not shaved for years and dressed in animal skins. Those who grew up in the 1690s would be emboldened by the tales of Henry Avery. To them, he was a folk hero, an average Englishman just like them, who led a mutiny against a corrupt expedition and went on a crusade against the Mohammedan enemy, made his fortune, pissed off the greedy East India Company, and then rightly escaped justice. And indirectly, this media sensation wasn't a bad thing for the government. England was at war. They needed young men to be roused to action and seek their fortune. Specifically, employment as privateers or men of war in the King's Navy. But when the war ended and these men lacked employment, they would simply continue their old trade. In Nassau, New Providence, the same place where Avery had landed 20 years prior, this new generation, inspired by his deeds, built their own Republic of Pirates, referring to it as a second Madagascar. When Woodes Rogers arrived, some of them boarded their ships and went east, same as he had done. One of their ships was even called the Fancy, christened in his honor. Here they arrived on the real Madagascar, and some even outdid him in the fortunes they claimed. Henry Avery was born sometime in the 1650s. Chances are he was still alive in 1720, maybe even 1730. Perhaps he sat on a porch somewhere in his native Plymouth, facing the Great Grey Sea and reading the newspaper of the exploits in the West and the East. One can only fathom his thoughts. Most certainly, he was well aware of the part he had played. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, you might have noticed that I have switched to releasing more long-form content. The research, recording, and editing of these videos require a lot of effort, without a guarantee of necessarily paying off. So if you want to support me and guarantee a long, and I mean a long, future of pirate videos, please consider supporting me monetarily on Patreon, a one-time payment via PayPal, or even becoming a YouTube channel member. I'd prefer the former too, because Patreon viewers can watch my videos without ads. Otherwise, hitting the subscribe button and notification bell, liking, sharing, and commenting on the video will help in spreading it. Or if you want to talk about history or whatever with fellow pirate enthusiasts, please check out the link to our Discord server in the video description. Cheers!